since it's 10:10, I will call and we will start with the minutes of the last meeting. Jim.
The Goingsnake District Heritage Association meeting.
By the way, if you're not talking, you may want to mute your phone. We're getting some feedback. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, Goingsnake District Heritage Association meeting was called to order at 10:05 a.m. by President Jack Baker with 13 members and guests present virtually. 50 people have watched the YouTube video. The minutes of the April meeting were read by Secretary Jim Terry and were approved as read. There was no financial report. Maribel Chase's Cherokee Moments presentation was from Colonial Office Records London office that Jerry Clark had transcribed from a letter written April 9th, 1779 by Robert Dews to British Cherokee agent Alexander Cameron. Jack Baker announced that longtime member Meg Hamilton had passed. Rita Parnell commented about a recent trip with Andy Squires to Tennessee to visit Cherokee historical sites. David Hampton told us the Trail of Tears Association spring meeting went well, the first ever on Zoom. Anita Fingersmith gave a presentation about the genesis of the Eastern Band. Jack Baker announced that our July meeting will be held in person at the Talbot Library and Museum in Colcord, Oklahoma. Jack Baker's presentation concerned a Tennessee Supreme Court case against Lewis Ross and the contracts for provisions and supplies for Trail of Tears detachments. This was from his recent research trip with Michael Wren to the Tennessee State Library and Archives. Wanda Elliott announced that the Adair Historical and Genealogical Society had $408,000 for the first phase of its new building. Jack Baker told us Jack Gregory had taken a desk to the Cherokee Nation vault that might have been made by the Moravians. Jack Baker adjourned the meeting at 11:45 a.m.
There are a couple of corrections. At the end, it was Renard Strickland who had purchased the John Ross desk.
Oh, it was, what's that name again?
Renard, R-E-N-N-A-R-D, Strickland. But Jack Gregory was with him and they had written a couple of books or some books together.
Okay, thank you. I'll correct that.
Are there any other additions or corrections? Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes as corrected.
I so move.
Okay, and Vicki is seconding, I assume? Okay,
Yes.
okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye or thumbs up, either one. Okay, any opposed? The minutes are approved. Thank you. Okay. Jim, I assume you did not hear. So, Jim, you did not hear from Ruth, did you?
No, I didn't.
Okay, thank you. Then we will go into our Cherokee Moments with Maribel.
Good morning, everyone. My Cherokee Moments for this morning is Cherokee Indian Letters, Talks, and Treaties, 1786 to 1838. And the original letters and papers are among the holdings of the Georgia Department of Archives and History. And I've taken 4 letters that I'm going to read this morning from microfilm roll number 1253 is where these 4 letters are located. The first letter, Clarksville, the 29th of August, 1851. To His Excellency G.R. Gilmer. Sir, with pleasure, I acknowledge the receipt of yours, of the 15th requesting some information concerning the parentage of John Martin, treasurer of the Cherokee Nation, and the two Watt Adares, the father of John Martin. Oh, there's supposed to be a period there. The father of John Martin was a native of Virginia, the brother of Joseph Martin, the first agent of the Cherokee Nation after the Revolution. I have been acquainted with John Martin since he was about 10 years old. We went to school together when we were boys. He was raised principally by a brother-in-law who was a very decent white man. Martin's father died when he was nearly grown. The father of the Adares were both natives of Ireland. They came to the U.S. after they were grown, and both had Cherokee Indian women for their wives, in parentheses, as had Martin. They all have received payment for their lands after becoming citizens of the U.S. agreeable to the Articles of the Treaty of 1818. Sir, I am happy to say to your excellency that I have but little doubt if there is immigrating offices opened among the Cherokees, the most of the natives will go beyond the Mississippi. Sir, any information that I can give you with regard to the Cherokees shall be done with pleasure. I remain your excellency's obedient and humble servant, Benjamin Cleveland. The second letter, Clarksville, 30th of August, 1831. Sir, yours of the 15th, asking for information connected with the family history of John Martin and the two Watt Adares of the Cherokee tribe of Indians, has been received. I take pleasure in furnishing the desired information. John Martin, the present treasurer of the nation, was born and lived in that part of the nation which is now this county, up to the time of the last session by the Cherokees. His father was a white man of the same name with a son, and lived among the Cherokees from quite a youth to the period of his death. His mother was a half-breed, so that Martin himself is but 1/4 Indian. I have known Martin for several years and have found him to be a high-minded, honorable man and quite a gentleman in his deportment. Watt Adair, and incidentally, for those of you who are not aware, there are two Watt Adairs. One is red Watt and one is black Watt. Watt Adair, the Chief Justice of the Cherokee Nation, is the son of a white man by the name of Edward Adair. His mother was a half-breed. His father lived in Pendleton District, South Carolina, and as soon as the son could be taken from its mother, Adair was removed to the care and protection of his father. The father done a fatherly part by him. He was educated at the best schools at that time in South Carolina and inherited the whole of his father's estate. He, however, squandered it in a few years. He was at one time the sheriff of Pendleton District and so very popular among the people that, notwithstanding his Indian descent, could have received any office in the power of the district to give. He took a reserve in the county of Hall under the last treaty with the Cherokees and lived on it from the time it was surveyed until the sale of it to the United States Commissioners. In 1824, he then for the first time went among the Cherokees, with whom he has lived ever since. Since his removal there, he has married a niece of John Martin's. Black Watt Adair is the son of a white man by the name of John Adair, who was a brother of the father of the Chief Justice. His mother was a half-breed. The father of Black Watt lived in Pendleton District, where Black Watt himself lived until his marriage. He married into a very reputable family by the name of Thompson, now living in this county. Adair had a reserve in this county. After the sale of it in 1824, he removed to his present residence. The Thompsons, who are white men living in the Cherokee Nation, are the brothers of Black Watts' wife. One of the Thompsons married a daughter of Martin's. The other two married sisters by the name of Lynch, who are the nieces of Martin. A son of Black Watts has also married a daughter of Martin. I know all these people, and were it not that I did know that they had Indian blood in them, I should never have detected it by looking at them. Respectfully, your obedient servant, Samuel A. Wales. And this was addressed Clarksville, Georgia, 30th of August, 1831, to George R. Gilmer, governor of Georgia. The third letter, to His Excellency, the Governor of Georgia. The petition of Samuel Mays showeth unto your excellency that he is one of the unfortunate persons convicted at the Supreme Court of Gwinnett County, now in session, for residing in the Cherokee Nation within the limits of Georgia without a permit, that he has been reduced to this miserable condition without any the least intention on his part of violating the laws of Georgia or submitting to their requirements. He had married the daughter of Walter Adair, a native of said nation, and when the laws of Georgia went into operation, he prepared to remove without the limits of Georgia, that he had actually removed a part of his property without the state, and his family was alone detained at her father's by sickness, and was remaining to recover her health. And when your petitioner was on a visit only to see his afflicted wife, that he was arrested by the guard and bound over for his appearance at court, that on trial he was not able to show them facts from the absence of his friends who did not believe that the trial would be had at this term. Your petitioner would most respectfully represent unto your excellency that very soon after his arrest, so soon as they were able to be removed, they were taken to Habersham, the old part where they have since resided and where they intend to remain until removed to Alabama. Your petitioner further represents unto your excellency that if a pardon can be extended to him, he will not return within the limits of Georgia unless he complies with law in such case made and provided. The foregoing facts are stated to your excellency to induce you to extend to an unfortunate man that clemency entrusted to you by the Constitution, and in duty bound we willingly pray, and so forth. The 17th of September, 1831, and this was written by Samuel Mays. The fourth letter, Cherokee Agency, 27th of September, 1831. Sir, the last mail brought me your letter of the 4th, and I can give you the names of but very few of the officers of this nation, especially the counselors, as I have not attended any of their councils since the late constitutional arrangement. The following are all that I can now recollect. John Ross, Principal Chief. George Lowry, Assistant Principal Chief. And in parentheses, I believe that is his title. Major Ridge, one of the Principal Chief's Privy Counselors. And in parentheses, the balance of them I do not know. Andrew Ross, Walter Adair, in parentheses, read, and the Spirit, alias John Huss, The judges of the Supreme Court, Walter A. Dare, in parentheses, Black, and Daniel McCoy. Judges of the circuit courts, Joseph Lynch, Marshall, John Ridge, president of the committee, and Goingsnake, speaker of the council. William Cootie and William Rogers are secretaries. John Martin, treasurer. Richard Taylor, Herr Conrad, Thomas Foreman, Joseph Van, and Edward Gunter are members of the committee. And John Watts and James Spears are members of the council. The general council, and he has in parentheses, I believe, consists of 32 members, but I do not now recollect the names of any of the others. And this is very respectfully, Your Excellency's obedient servant, E. Montgomery. And this was written to George Gilmer at Midgeville, Georgia. And that concludes my Cherokee Moments for this morning.
Thank you, Mary Bell. Appreciate that.
Yes.
When you were talking about the Thompsons that were connected with John Martin,
Yes.
the houses were just south, if I remember correctly, of Fairmont, Georgia, which is east of Calhoun. And we went there by there on some of our bus trips because two of those houses were still standing. That belonged to the Thompsons. That was 20 years ago, and they were in good shape, so I assume they still are.
Yeah. Well, great. I hope so.
Yep. Okay. Well, as Jim said in our minutes earlier, our meeting next month will be in person at the Talbot Library, and it's our annual, well, we call it our annual picnic, but it's actually inside the schoolhouse. It's air conditioned. And we're going to miss most of you because virtually all of you are from around the country. So, okay. One piece of business that we need to address is our treasurer, Ruth Faulkner. I have not been able to reach her by phone, and she has not been making the deposits or sending us reports. So I stopped by the bank and found out, I thought I was a signatory on the account and had been for many, many years, but the only card they had that they could bring up was the last one, and that was where Ruth and Maxine Hamilton were the signatories, and that was in 2008. And Maxine has not been a member of the organization for many years. So I said it would be a good idea to add myself and Luke Williams, as well as Ruth, as signatories on the account. So any discussions on this?
That sounds great.
Okay, I'll move that Jack Baker, Luke Williams, and Ruth Faulkner be the signatories on the Goingsnake account.
I second it.
Okay. Thanks, Ginger. Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor, signal by saying aye or a thumbs up.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. And then Jim will prepare the minutes because we'll have to send a copy of the minutes to the bank.
Okay. Do you want me to send that to you?
Yes, please.
Copy the minutes?
Yeah, and you'll probably need to sign it as secretary.
Okay.
So, okay. Do we have any other old or new business?
I don't have old or new business, but I wanted to ask a question about what Mary Bell read on that first letter. There's something in that letter that's always bothered me, and that is that he says that John Martin was raised by his brother-in-law, and I think everybody has always thought that that brother-in-law was Jeter Lynch, but Jeter Lynch's wife was only 2 years older than John. And I've always had difficulty reconciling that supposition that that was the brother-in-law.
Mhm. That's what it says. It says that he had been raised principally by a brother-in-law who was a very decent white man.
But it doesn't say which brother-in-law.
No,
But anytime you read interpretation of that letter, people always attribute that that brother-in-law was Jeter Lynch.
and so he couldn't be because he was too young.
Well, I mean, the wife, the sister, was only about 2 years older than John Martin. So for him to be raised by a brother-in-law who was married to his sister who was 2 years older, I mean, I know people married young, but that would be like a really child bride.
Hmm. And he doesn't indicate in the letter, he does not say who the brother-in-law was.
Yeah.
Patsy, could the brother-in-law have been Daniel McCoy?
I don't know. I mean, that's,
He would be. He married from my records. Daniel McCoy married John Martin's half sister about 1791, when John would have been about 7.
okay. So he was married to a Fields.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
he married Lucy Fields.
That would make more sense to me.
So the brother-in-law in this particular letter possibly is Daniel McCoy.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was Anna's ancestor. Okay. Very good. Okay. The other questions or comments on Mary Bell's turkey moments? Since we're backing up there. Okay. Well, I see that our speaker, Lindsay Robertson, has joined us. And Lindsay is a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School, and he wrote the great book, Conquest by Law, which is how the discovery of America dispossessed indigenous peoples of their lands. So Lindsay, it's good to have you with us.
It's good to be with you, Jack. I'm gonna, before I switch off my more formal pose, Jack invited me at lunch. It feels like it was about 4 or 5 years ago to make a presentation. It slipped both of our minds until this past weekend, if I'm remembering right, when Jack very kindly reminded me, my wife and I are on vacation. I am dressed far more casually than I normally like to be for presentations like this. I'm looking around. I got on early. Jack invited me to partly to see how nice and understanding you all looked. And you look pretty nice and understanding. So I'll go ahead. I don't normally, so this is not my normal look. I'm in a hotel room. I won't tell you where because I don't want that known. That's how embarrassed I am by the fact that.
And by the way, what I failed to say about Lindsay, been head of the American Indian law at the University of Oklahoma for many years. And we've been friends for close to 20 years or so.
Or more, I think.
Probably longer.
Yeah, I've been at OU since 1997. And it's good to see Kirsten here too, who I haven't seen in a long time, who is a fantastic Indian law scholar. And Jack, frankly, she could have given the presentation you asked me to give today, and I'm sure she would have done a much better job. So this is, I'm seeing debts of meals in the future from you to me.
Okay, so she may correct you and add to your comments. It's your chance person to correct me.
Well, I'll jump in just because, as I say, I am on vacation and my tolerant wife and I are off on adventures when we finish here. But I told Jack, I'd take certainly half an hour or so. Jack asked me to talk about the McGirt decision, which I'll do, and then Kirsten can, after I leave, correct any mistakes I make. So you're like the dream audience for a presentation on this, because you already know all this stuff, and you'll have questions, I'm guessing, that might arise from, you know, particular situations, and I am happy to answer any and all of them. I've been involved in McGirt. I was involved in Murphy and sort of helped prep lawyers before their Supreme Court arguments, and I'm pretty familiar with the issues. I spent not entirely gratuitous, because I think it's related autobiography. I spent 10 years in Oklahoma as moonlighting from my law teaching job as special counsel in Indian affairs to Governor Keating and Governor Henry for both of Governor Henry's terms, which were sort of the glory days of state tribal relations looking back. I mean, that's when the cross-deputization agreements were all entered into, and the Model Gaming Act and stuff like that. Things are very different now, but my point in mentioning that is I sort of, you know, I can tell you a little bit about what I suspect the state is thinking on these issues and the directions they might want to go to, having worked with the state and understanding what their priorities and concerns are. But so I want to leave most of the time, Jack, if it's okay with you, for Q&A and conversation. But just sort of general framework, McGirt, and maybe some of you don't, does anybody not know the McGirt case, or everybody does? Do you all feel pretty comfortable with the, that's an unfair question.
No,
So
you might say something about it. By the way, almost everyone on here is from out of state.
okay, all right. So maybe, all right, that's good. That's fine then. So that's very helpful. So here's the background in the McGirt case. Jim C. McGirt's a Seminole tribal citizen. He committed a heinous crime in lands that he claimed after his sentencing were still part of the Muskogee Nation Reservation, the sort of where the Muskogee ended up after their Trail of Tears migration, which is next door to Cherokee Nation, of course. And the state took the position, no, it's that reservation was disestablished. That's the term we use when the entire reservation ceases to be a reservation as a legal entity. So you're actually just on land in the state of Oklahoma. The reason that this matters is that the way criminal jurisdiction works is if land is Indian country, which is a defined term in Title 18 of the US Code, then there's a sort of confused structure of potential prosecutions, could be tribal, state, federal, or a combination of tribal and federal. If it's outside Indian country, which was Oklahoma's position when McGirt was apprehended, then it's just state jurisdiction. So this was an important question. Is it still Indian country? If it was, McGirt argued it was Indian country under provision section 18 USC section 1151A, which says all land within the bounds of a reservation are Indian country. And again, to circle back, Oklahoma said, well, it used to be a reservation, but it's not anymore. This case went all the way to the Supreme Court. McGirt's position through the 10th Circuit. The 10th Circuit agreed with Mr. McGirt that the reservation had not been disestablished, that the Muskogee Reservation was still intact. And the Supreme Court agreed with the 10th Circuit. And I won't get into the reasons why, because of probably greater interest to you will be, well, what does this mean? What does it mean for Muskogee Nation? What does it mean for the others of the 5 tribes and maybe other tribes in Oklahoma and elsewhere? And the short and immediate answer was, and this is something the state rather zealously and aggressively pointed out, McGirt is a case involving application of one federal statute, which is a statute called the Major Crimes Act, which says that if it's Indian country, then the federal government has a primary jurisdiction to prosecute if it's a crime committed, a major crime, and this was, there's a list of them, and this fell on the list, committed by an Indian against anyone. And the states do not have jurisdiction over those crimes. That's the Major Crimes Act, which is in, if you're interested, 18 USC section 1153. And so what did that mean? Well, immediately and again, this is the state's position, McGirt clearly holds that Muskogee Nation is Indian country for purposes of the Major Crimes Act. And what that meant was that any major crime, and again, there's a list of them, and it's all the really bad felonies. So it's murder and rape and arson and stuff. If it's any of those crimes is committed in now the re-recognized Muskogee Nation reservation, which includes the southern 2/3 of the city of Tulsa, incidentally. So any major crime committed by an Indian in that area, it's going to be prosecuted by the United States. There's concurrent jurisdiction that the tribe exercises, but the tribes are limited in the sentences they can impose, ordinarily to 1 year per charged offense. Muskogee Nation is something called a Tribal Law and Order Act tribe. So they get 3 years per charged offense, and they can stack them up to 9 years if you've got multiple charged offenses. But still, the primary prosecution for these really serious crimes where you're looking at life in prison and 50 years and stuff, the principal prosecution will be by the federal government. And so suddenly the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tulsa, which was presided over by a former student and good friend of mine named Trent Shores, who's Choctaw, had to staff prosecutions of cases that ordinarily the state would have dealt with. And it's every really bad crime committed in the southern 2/3 of the city of Tulsa by an Indian, which includes citizens of any federally recognized tribe, more or less. So that is potentially a lot of prosecutions. If a Cherokee citizen robs a convenience store in South Tulsa, suddenly the state has nothing to do with it. That's the United States government that's going to have to prosecute. So they've got to assign investigators from the FBI, they've got to get service by US Marshals, they've got to arrest the guy, and he's potentially subject to incarceration in federal prison. It's going to be a federal judge who oversees the prosecution. And you can just imagine, because there's a lot of bad stuff that happens, and a lot of times in southern 2/3 of the city of Tulsa, it's going to be by somebody who's carrying a tribal citizenship card. And those are now federal. And so they started hiring like mad. The state freaked out over, anxiety, because the feds have what's called prosecutorial discretion. They don't have to prosecute everybody. They get to choose. And ordinarily, it doesn't matter because the default is the state will prosecute. But here, again, because of the tribal sentencing limitations, that might not be adequate. So if it's hypothetically a Choctaw citizen kills somebody in South Tulsa and the United States doesn't have the resources to prosecute them, then the worst they're looking at is 9 years in jail with a sentence by Muskogee Creek. And so this law enforcement anxiety kicked in a big way. It's being addressed, has been addressed, and the state really has backed off fighting that on legal grounds. They tried to get the Supreme Court to overturn its own decision this past year, and the court declined to do that. So this part of the case seems pretty solid. And so the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tulsa is hiring people like mad. I've got a bunch of students jumping into Indian law classes and planning to head off to Tulsa to be assistant U.S. attorneys, which is great for my students. But it's certainly been an extra burden, and our congressional delegation is pushing for more funding for law enforcement, for FBI agents. We've had a lot of people. I've done a lot of out of office Indian law training because for the first year or so, the Justice Department was just sending assistant U.S. attorneys from other parts of the United States to Tulsa to take over some of this case law. None of them had ever seen it and didn't know anything about Indian law. And so we were doing short courses online like this for a period of a month or so with different groups of assistant U.S. attorneys that I was helping train up, so they kind of have a general idea of how the rules work. So that's the Major Crimes Act. There's another family of crimes that are subject to federal prosecution because of federal statute, and that's a statute. It's 18 U.S.C. section 1152, so it's right before the Major Crimes Act. It's called the Indian Country Crimes Act. and it says that crimes committed by Indians against non-Indians in Indian country are also subject to federal prosecution and not state prosecution. And they would, if they're committed by Indians against non-Indians, be subject to tribal prosecution as well, but with the sentencing cap issue. And crimes committed by non-Indians against Indians in Indian country are subject exclusively to federal jurisdiction. The McGirt decision doesn't deal with Indian Country Crimes Act jurisdiction, and the state has taken the position that it should have jurisdiction concurrent with federal jurisdiction if the perpetrators are non-Indian. So for those non-Indian versus Indian crimes, and there's a pending Supreme Court case, it's been argued, it's called Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta. Keep your eyes open for that. That decision, which should come down next, weeks or so. But the argument that Oklahoma made is based largely on a problem of non-prosecution again, but it's bigger than in the major crimes case. And it's this: Oklahoma said, look, if only the federal government can prosecute crimes by non-Indians against Indians in Indian country, and here we'll just keep talking about Muskogee nations, there's not even a tribal default if they elect not to prosecute. And these include misdemeanors. So there's a lot of crimes that could be committed, that have been committed by non-Indians against Indians. And if the feds don't prosecute, then people are just going to walk. And people will figure this out, right? That the odds of my getting prosecuted if I'm a non-Indian and my victim is an Indian, whatever it happens to be, odds are I'll probably not get prosecuted. I may not get arrested. And so the state expressed anxiety about just lawlessness by non-Indians committing crimes against Indians. So they pushed this Castro Huerta case before the Supreme Court. I think they're going to lose. I think they almost have to lose. And Kirsten can tell me if she disagrees, because it's hard to imagine a regime in which certain lands would be Indian country for purposes of one federal criminal statute and not Indian country for another, particularly since they both draw on the same definitional section, which is 18 U.S.C. 1151. So I think they're going to go down in flames. And I listened to the oral argument. Some of you may have as well. I'm sure Kristen did. And listening to a lot of the justices, it seemed to me like the real question was for the state was, why are you guys here trying to get us to change the law nationally that's existed for a century to allow states to exercise jurisdiction over these non-Indian versus Indian crimes? Why aren't you in Congress trying to shake more money out of them to hire more federal prosecutors, so that they don't have to decline to prosecute as many of these cases? And so my expectation is they'll lose. And that would mean that all of the criminal jurisdiction rules that we saw in the major crimes case would apply for these Indian Country Crimes Act cases too. And it isn't that people wouldn't get prosecuted, just that there'd be a major shift in responsibility for prosecution from the state to the federal government. And the tribe would get more involved too, because they would pick up a lot of these misdemeanors committed by Indians. And again, it's citizens of any federally recognized tribe. And Muskogee Nation started hiring people too. Now, here's where it gets more interesting to you guys, because it's not just Muskogee Nation anymore. There were a bunch of pending criminal cases in Oklahoma at the time, working their way through the Oklahoma criminal justice system. And the minute McGirt came down, a lot of these defendants said, well, wait a minute, my crime was committed in what used to be the Chickasaw Nation, but the language in the Chickasaw Nation's Allotment Act, which is materially identical to the language in the Muskogee Nation's Allotment Act, the Supreme Court in McGirt found that language in the Muskogee context did not constitute disestablishment. So maybe Chickasaw Nation is also, the reservation is still around. And how about Choctaw? And how about Cherokee? And how about Seminole? And how about Quapaw? And those are the ones that have made it up. And in each of those cases, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest criminal appellate court in the state, there's no appeal within the state system to anybody. In each of those cases, that court said, yep, just like McGirt, those reservations are still intact as well. And almost half of the state of Oklahoma, as a result of those 5 state decisions and the Supreme Court decision in Muskogee, is now recognized as Indian country, at least for purposes of the Major Crimes Act, almost certainly for purposes of the Indian Country Crimes Act, and possibly, and this is the last thing maybe the last thing I'll say, and I want to leave time for questions, possibly for purposes of civil jurisdiction as well. And that's what's really causing heartache in the Stitt administration, because we can talk about crimes, and that's really interesting. And it's important if you or a family member are caught up in the criminal justice system, either on the perpetrator side or the victim side, and you can have sort of views about safety and security and that sort of thing. But civil jurisdiction affects everybody. Civil jurisdiction is of 2 types. There's civil regulatory jurisdiction, which includes taxes, zoning, licensing, all of the sort of things that governments do to us, right, as citizens, and civil adjudicatory jurisdiction, which is the power of courts to exercise jurisdiction to resolve civil disputes between people. So if I sue somebody, does the court have jurisdiction to hear my complaint? That's civil adjudicatory jurisdiction. McGirt didn't talk about civil adjudicatory jurisdiction, but it did talk about the definition of Indian country. And so a sort of a divide appeared, and the state, and this is really where I think the state got especially anxious, understandably, looked into, well, what would it cost us if we didn't have full civil regulatory jurisdiction over all of this land that's now recognized as Indian country? What are the rules for that? And I'll give you one of the rules. There are a lot on the civil regulatory side. One of the rules is that if you are a tribal citizen and you live and work in your tribe's Indian country, you can't be required to pay state income tax. So some of you who are Cherokee citizens, all of you, I guess, are Cherokee citizens, you live out of state, you're looking for a sort of semi-retirement plan, come home to Tahlequah, find a job somewhere. And if McGirt applies on the civil side, you can't be required, you won't have any state income tax obligation. There's also a possibility that that part of the decision would be retroactive. And we've got a couple cases pending now. I think there are 2 tax cases that I know of that are pending now, in which Oklahoma taxpayers who are tribal citizens have said, I've been living and working in my tribe's Indian country since like 1954, and I've been paying state income taxes. I want it back. So and of course the state is sitting down imagining this happening everywhere in eastern Oklahoma with every tribal citizen who lives and works in their Indian country. So there's very aggressive legal battling going on in hopes of persuading the federal courts not to hold these lands to be Indian country for civil regulatory purposes, but just for criminal jurisdiction purposes. And again, as I said before, it's a challenging argument because it's the definition in the federal code. It is in the criminal code, but there's a case involving the Sac and Fox Nation and the Oklahoma Tax Commission's power to tax, in which the Supreme Court said, well, let's use that 18 U.S.C. 1151 definition for Indian country here. And so it's been done. The Supreme Court has already, in a sense, effectively said that this definition applies on the civil regulatory side, and specifically the state taxation side in Oklahoma. So we're waiting to see how those cases come out, but that will have again, a major impact and shuffling of authority and jurisdiction over many aspects of life in those parts of the state that have been re-recognized as reservations, which is to say Indian country. There are tribes out west in western Oklahoma with pending cases. There are some tribes that have had the question of the continuance of their reservation boundaries already litigated and lost. I think Citizen Potawatomi is in that list. There's a pending Comanche case. There's a pending Cheyenne Arapaho case. They're all at very early stages. I think Comanche has advanced through a trial appeal and maybe on appeal in the state system, but I think the Cheyenne Arapaho case is still at the trial level, where these arguments of reservation continuity and non-disestablishment are being made. So it's possible that we'll see other tribes in Oklahoma have their reservation boundaries re-recognized, and then we'll have to see again how far the decision, the McGirt decision goes. Is it also Indian Country Crimes Act, and does it also apply on the civil side? So stay tuned to all of that. And I am, at this point, more than happy to take any questions that you guys might have.
First, Lindsay, let me give you a background on why we wanted to discuss this. In April, I talked about the Goingsnake tragedy. I don't know if you're familiar with it, when Zeke Proctor had killed a Cherokee citizen, a lady who jumped in front of her husband, who Zeke was trying to kill. So there was a jurisdictional issue between the federal courts in Fort Smith, and they tried to exert jurisdiction over it, even though that was in 1872, because in April was the 150th anniversary of that. So under the 1866 treaty, the tribal courts had jurisdiction over all of their citizens, and it specifically states both natural and adopted. And the person that Zeke had been trying to kill was an adopted citizen because he was married to the Cherokee lady, and yet the federal courts were trying to exert jurisdiction because he had tried to kill a white man. So I brought this up, and I said, okay, so 150 years later, now we have the same issue with jurisdiction with the McGirt case. So that was the background of inviting you.
See, this is the Jack Baker I know, who lives in multiple centuries and can pull these things across time. So that's a great, I do know the case, and that whole period, questions of jurisdiction are really, really interesting. There's a Cherokee case, it's US versus Rogers, that deals with that topic. I don't remember what year it was, but it's late 19th century. And that's the decision where the court said that there needs to be, before somebody has Indian status for purposes of the criminal jurisdiction rules, they need to have some degree of Indian ancestry. Indian blood, I think is what they say in Rogers. And so, then the Supreme Court hasn't said anything about that since. So we don't really know what happens with adopted citizens. We don't have a Supreme Court decision, for instance, on what would happen if a Cherokee freedman with no native ancestry committed a crime. That we don't, whether that would qualify as an Indian crime by an Indian or a non-Indian. But we have circuit decisions, but no Supreme Court decision. Any questions?
I have a question, Patsy. Is one of Oklahoma's concerns, it's my understanding that state law enforcement receives federal dollars. So is one of their concerns, if they don't have the caseload, they won't get the money, and the money would be redirected to federal or tribal?
It's hard to imagine that's not a concern. I'm not inside the government, but it's hard to imagine that's not a concern. And with that too, you would imagine, and I think in both of these are understandable concerns, is jobs. There's just not, if suddenly those county prosecutors aren't prosecuting any crimes involving Indians. And I mean, there are counties in Oklahoma that are majority tribal citizen. And so what are those guys going to do? Yeah, I mean, you know, their caseload, presumably their criminal docket would shrink dramatically. And so there might
Maybe
be,
they could ask for a job with a tribe or the federal government.
and they could. Absolutely.
Thank you. That was just my supposition behind it.
Any other questions? See, if you were out here, you'd have a million. You'd be asking me things like, do I have to pay property tax anymore? And stuff like that. So this is where the out-of-staters are. You guys can be a little bit more detached from the immediate concerns of folks.
Well, I've had my thoughts on how it should be, which is, yes, property, if you live there, property tax to the appropriate tribal nation, not to the state.
And those will all be questions that get worked out, Patsy, when they figure out whether this applies on the civil side.
Right. Same for sales tax, who collects the sales tax, all of that.
Absolutely.
You know, I would like to see tribes have full authority.
Yeah, mine, and I don't share this because nobody else seems to have been thinking about this, but there's a, and so Kirsten, don't share this. But there's a federal statute, and it isn't going to matter immediately. There's a federal statute called the Trade Intercourse Act that was first passed in 1790, last passed in 1834, but it includes a provision saying that if you do business with Indians in Indian country, you have to have an Indian trader license. So my first thought was, well, wait a minute, because there's all of a sudden a lot of non-Indians doing business in Indian country, like every store in eastern Oklahoma. Do those people all have to get Indian trader licenses? And if they don't, and they won't because they don't have any idea about this statutory requirement, does that mean they're all going to prison? Which would be interesting and you know, sort of jarring and sudden. So I looked this up. I called, it's funny, Kirsten will appreciate this. I called, you know, friends of mine who work on Cherokee stuff in DC and said, what about this? And they were all like, oh God, don't say that. Just don't say that out loud. But, you know, but I looked it up and I found out, and Kirsten, you may know this already. I sure didn't, but that there's an exception for the 5 tribes because they're civilized from the Indian trader licensing requirements. Did you know that? Yeah, I didn't know it either. There are all these little, this is the problem with doing Indian law. There's so many tiny little rabbit hole quirks. So that solved the problem for at least the 5 big tribes. Now Quapaws, I don't know, but again, nobody's talking about it. So we'll all just keep quiet and maybe it won't be a thing. Any other questions?
But from what you said, there could be zoning and licensing issues separate from that.
Yeah. Yep. And then on the civil side, we haven't talked about it, but the jurisdiction rules are a little murkier. You know, I mean, they're clear if you're talking about tribal jurisdiction over Indians in their own tribes, Indian country. But once you get into non-members, it becomes much more complicated. And so those issues will be tricky to resolve once this decision on whether McGirt applies on the civil side is made, assuming it's comes down on the tribe side.
How would that apply to licensing? For example, I live in Arkansas. I live right on the border, but I have an Oklahoma real estate license. So how would it affect the licensing of tribal citizens versus non-tribal citizens?
Yeah, so you're out of state. So my gut is it probably wouldn't matter, but the so I'll quickly the civil regulatory jurisdiction rules are basically that if you're a member, there doesn't seem to be any problem, but if you're a non-member engaging in conduct in a tribe's Indian country, so that would be you showing up and selling real estate with your license, then you're subject to the tribe's regulatory jurisdiction, which would include the licensing requirement, only if you are in a consensual commercial relationship with the tribe or tribal members, or you are engaging in conduct that, and here's the language, threatens or has a direct effect on the tribe's political integrity, economic security, or health or welfare. Now, who knows? I mean, it's called the second Montana exception. We don't really know exactly what that means. We have applications and arguments, but that would be the question that had to be answered, Vicki. Are you engaged in conduct that threatens or has a direct effect on the tribe's economic security, political integrity, or health or welfare? And if the answer was yes, then the tribe could require you to have a license. And if the answer was no, then you'd need a state license. So you can start to see how it's as much clearer on the criminal side than it is on the civil side.
I just want to add my understanding outside of Oklahoma, because a lot of these rules are what exists in Indian country everywhere else. So it's not like this is new. There is experience in basically with every state and every tribe that doesn't have a specific congressional act that grants civil and criminal jurisdiction to the state. These are the default rules that exist. So basically all that's really happened is the court said, okay, these areas are Indian country, so they're supposed to be treated the same way Indian country is treated everywhere else. So for like where I live here in Michigan, these are the rules that have always applied for the tribes here. Now, they don't have the land base that we're talking about in Oklahoma. But there is a long experience of tribes dealing with these types of issues. And from what I can tell from my perspective here in Michigan is the tribes in Oklahoma, the tribal governments have responded to this very seriously. They are beefing up law enforcement. They are entering into local agreements with non-Indian communities to answer some of these questions. And the way that I think a lot of these issues are handled is on a consensual basis here. So like the real estate licensing, the presumption would be that there's a consensual relationship there, which is why I don't think we've seen more litigation on the civil adjudicatory or regulatory side, is because the tribes proactively have prevented that litigation by entering into agreements or setting up expectations that if you engage in certain behaviors, the assumption is that you've consented.
Yeah, that's been the history here, but not the recent history here. And it's because of the current administration and because of the massive quantity of non-Indians who suddenly find themselves in Indian country, never having thought they were. And so that's but Kirsten, of course, exactly right, that all McGirt really did was to add some extra land in Oklahoma to the list of land that's Indian country. And so in terms of application of existing laws, it's now just the same laws that apply in Indian country everywhere, pretty much. We did have a long run of compacting. In the Keating administration, the Henry administration was nothing but compacting with tribes. And that continued into the Fallon administration, and then it sort of died in the Stitt administration. The states become almost entirely adversarial. It started before McGirt over extension of the gaming compacts, and then has just continued and been just blown up even more by McGirt. And so some of the rational behavior, Kirsten, that you mentioned about, local communities and stuff, I talked with a student yesterday after class who's Chickasaw, who said that, where she lives, like the Pontotoc County Sheriff's Office, for a year, we have this cross-deputization agreement to allow each other's law enforcement officers, the federal, state, and tribal, to be deputized so that they don't act out of their jurisdiction if they arrest somebody who turns out to be not subject to their sovereign's criminal jurisdiction, so that they don't get arrested for wrongful arrest or battery or something if they pull a guy off and suddenly it turns out he's not an Indian, and and this sort of thing. And so we've been doing cross-deputization agreements throughout the state since the Keating administration. And what was reported to me is the Pontotoc County Sheriff's Office is now refusing to enter into or renew a cross-deputization agreement because they're mad about McGirt. And to the extent that that sort of attitude spreads, this is just potentially going to become more problematic on the grassroots level. But, you know, we have an election coming up, so, you know, who knows who'll be the next governor and what their attitude will be about these issues. We could get back to normal, rational interchange and contractual relations and that sort of thing. Anything else? All right, Jack, I'm seeing no further questions. I'm gonna join my patient spouse in doing stuff.
Okay. Well, tell Lynn we appreciate it, and you all have a great time.
Thank you so much. You've been a great group, and enjoy the rest of your meeting. And Kirsten, again, great to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay. Well, there are a couple of events that we haven't discussed, and David may join in, and that was the release of the Wilma Menkiller quarter, which was I don't know that, well, you probably can't see it, but at least not well, but you can Google it. And this, by the way, is supposedly Anna's quarter if she ever gets it. So we had the release of that a week ago Monday, which was an extremely nice event. Someone from the Mint was there, and it initially was to be on the lawn at our Capitol building, downtown Tahlequah on the square. But because of the rain earlier, they moved it to the convention center near the casino, the Yashoda Center. And I was running late, and I got there it started at 10. I got there about 5 to 10. The parking lot was almost totally full, and people could not get in to the event. And David went to the overflow, which was in the snack bar there at the casino where they had the big screens set up. But and Wilma's two daughters were there, and Charlie Soap was there, and we had, and former Chief Ross Swimmer spoke, telling about Wilma and the decisions to bring her in as his deputy chief and so on. And of course, we had the former chief, Joe Bird, and Bill John Baker, and Chuck Hoskin, of course, played an important role in it, also the current chief. So there were 3 of the former chiefs present there, plus the current chief. So and then yesterday, when remember the removal bike riders returned to Tahlequah, it was a very nice event. Unfortunately, one of them had an accident and injured, not seriously, but both arms were taped up. So that was the first major accident they had, and it was there on the last little leg of the trip. But she was fine, and she spoke for the Cherokee Nation riders at the event. So, and there, of course, we had the current chief, Chuck Hoskin, former Chief Bill John Baker, former Chief Joe Bird, and former Chief Chad Smith. So yesterday we missed Ross Swimmer, and the week before we missed Chad Smith. So, but I was thinking, gee, we all missed a great opportunity of getting photos of all the chiefs together, but it did not happen.
Nobody there from maybe the Cherokee Phoenix took pictures of all of them?
There were pictures taken, but I don't know if they took pictures of all of them individually or not. But they did not take a group photo.
That is a missed opportunity.
Yes.
Wow.
So within a week, we had virtually all the chiefs there, but we missed one at each of the events. So it would have been nice to have had all of them at each of the events. So, but the writers, they did fantastic, and it was a really good time, and they missed you, Anna, and asked about you.
Good, thank you. Yeah, it was all women. I don't know if you all know that or not. Which girl fell, Jack?
It was, good grief. I went blank.
Great, Madison Whitekiller.
Yes, Madison. I went blank on her name there. So, but
So,
because I talked with her afterwards also. Like I said, she spoke for the entire group because they had one from the Eastern Band and then one from the Cherokee Nation that spoke for the group. So,
And it said in the Tulsa World this morning, I couldn't believe it, that 100 people were there to greet the bike riders. And I thought, oh, there was way over 100.
yes,
I don't
they
know.
were.
I don't think there was 1,000, but there might have been 300 or 400.
Yeah.
they are so well received everywhere they go, at every site. It is just amazing. And those girls, well, are both, you know, everybody from Qualla and Cherokee Nation, but this year, all the representatives were girls. And they just did a marvelous job.
But that's from the Cherokee Nation side.
That's, well, I'm sorry, did I not make that clear? So these are the Cherokee Nation girls. And at one point, I have to tell you this, it's the news media is following them everywhere. And we are at Rattlesnake Springs, which is a real emotional site. Jack, why don't you tell them what Rattlesnake Springs is, and then I'll finish the story.
That's where one of the major camps was during that hot summer that they were camped out in the east. But it's a beautiful site. There's a series of springs there. I mean, it's not so beautiful now, but there are a series of springs there.
It's where the last council was, right?
Right, and the last council was held there.
And these 5 girls, a couple of whom spoke Cherokee beautifully, gathered over because as you would stop at a site, those kids have their own, and adults have their own rituals that they do, and that how they gather to think about things and ponder it, and everybody's not included in that. And at this particular site, the 5 girls, Cherokee Nation girls, gathered together and sang in Cherokee. And the news media was dropping these microphones over their heads and trying to catch them singing. And they clearly had no interest in the news media. And an airplane went over. And afterwards, the news guy said, "Would you sing the first part of that song again?" And they very quickly told him that they were not singing that for the news media. And it was just real, I thought that was real important. I thought their values about that were real important. That journey was not about the news media. Anyway, it was just, and then they all went to water, which they've never done there before that I know.
Right.
It was, I mean, it's just a wonderful experience to be with them.
Anna, what song were they singing in Cherokee?
Jack, I don't know.
I believe it was Orphan Child,
It was Orphan Child, yeah.
which is supposed to be composed on the trail.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah, but they were all huddled together right by the spring, back to everybody. It was certainly not their intentions for that to be a performance.
Ethan from the Eastern Band gave us a compliment, Anna. You remember Ethan?
Which one was Ethan?
He's the one who talked with us just before we left them from the Eastern Band.
Yeah. What did he say?
He said that they really missed us after we left because said it wasn't the same. I said, well, y'all read from the journal and different letters. And so he said, yes, we did that, but it just wasn't the same as having you and Anna there to talk to different sides.
And argue with each other.
You didn't mention that part.
And then, one of the other things that we're going to work on this year, David, I hope you're going to help us, is, and Jack, help me explain this. I don't know how to explain this. You know, the Eastern Band does not feel as connected to the Trail of Tears as Cherokee Nation. And finding things that are written and that really include them is something that we really want to do more of. And I mean, I wish I could, I can't, but Jack can. But tell them about the couple of things we found, because we had most of the Eastern Band were adults. You know, they weren't, our girls were under 24. All 5 of the Cherokee Nation girls were under 24. Eastern Band's people were not. They were adults. We had a former council member, but we had adults. But at one point, Jack read something which is a very moving thing about Goingsnake. And then he told that about right after that 3,000 people from Kuala or from the mountains had just been brought into the camp. One of the boys, the guys who was just kind and nice and great as he could be from Eastern Band, almost knocked Jack down. He came running over there and said to Jack, "Can I have a copy of that? Where did you get that? Is there any more of that?" So it's just something that we need to think about. And Mary Bell, maybe you can help us dig up some more things. Anything we can.
Well, that certainly would really be really good if we could do that.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Because it was good. We could have done more, as Anna says, but we tied this one where we read the account from Herman Ruda, the Moravian missionary. His little comment was that I think in the last few days or yesterday or whatever, over 3,000 of the Indians from the mountains of North Carolina were brought in to the agency. And the heat, so I did not have a thermometer, but the heat was extremely oppressive and all. So that was the account, which was a Moravian account, that Bubba wanted, and that is what he goes by, is Bubba, wanted to see more about. And then we also tied in Matthews, one of the Cherokee Nation writers, who talked about her being descended from all the Cherokees at Brasstown, the Wycliffes, the Buffingtons, I think, if I remember correctly, and the hog shooters, that where they gathered outside the church. Brett Riggs has a talk that he gives about that, which I think is on our Trail of Tears website, about them gathering at the church, waiting for the soldiers to come to take them. And they knelt in prayer there before they left. And we talked about, that she was descended from all of those at Brasstown. And then, interestingly enough, David put together quite quickly the Cherokee Marshal that was with us.
Thank you, David.
And his family. And as it turns out, we had, one of our major stops is at Andrews, North Carolina, which was near one of the removal forts. But it was also the site where Ned and Betty Welch, or Edward and Betty Welch, and Gideon and Rebecca Morris both lived, and they had exemptions from removal and fed many of the Cherokees that were hiding out trying to avoid removal. And there's a recent book that just came out on that, their determination to remain. Well, as it turns out, the marshal was descended from Gideon and Morris and his wife. And his wife was actually supposedly, I know they thought for many years, I don't remember if Anita found something different or not, that she was a sister of Junaluska and Wachacha, who remained North Carolina leaders after removal. Well, Gideon and Rebecca later moved to near Stillwell in the Cherokee Nation, but that was many years later. And so our marshal comes down from that family.
And what that helps is that ties the Eastern Band to the Trail of Tears.
And to the current Cherokee Nation, ties of people.
Right. So if any of you run across anything, it's so meaningful to those kids and the adults I think if we could talk about the most thing that was the most meaningful to me, Jack, and I think maybe to you too, is we go to Brainerd Cemetery, and you know that Brainerd mission was huge and lovely, and now it's in the middle of a shopping center. So it's really hard to interpret that and talk to those young people about what was there. And so Jack had asked them to find something in the Brainerd Journal that they would like to read when we got to the Brainerd mission. And oh my God, they were wonderful. They had picked out a piece that would just, I mean, you would all be crying if we read it right now. And each one of those 5 girls read a paragraph in that piece. And it was just really wonderful.
Because they had been reading Bertrude's journal all along. Yeah. And they continued to through the entire trip, each day, where they visited the same sites, or were the same sites that Buttrick was. So they read those portions.
And you know, that journal, what they're talking about is all these people coming to Brainerd to have the missionaries make caskets for their children.
And to bury them there.
And to bury them there. And there are hundreds of unmarked graves there, and especially of children. I mean, there were just babies dying everywhere. So it's just really wonderful. Anyway, I'm going to.
It's a very meaningful site to all the bike riders. So.
Yeah.
That site it's locked up. Is it open periodically, or is it?
It's open most days, and they're supposedly closing in the evening.
Okay.
But it was open there.
Okay.
But if you go back there, give me a call. I know the combination.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should have. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, they all swim in the Blue Spring. I mean, this year, they all were in the Blue Spring. It is so funny when we get there to watch them. It's just amazing. And nobody's in there but the bike riders, you know.
Well, they only allow Cherokees to go into it. They don't let anyone else. And the next morning, Ann and I were waiting for them, and they weren't coming, and they said they had decided to go to water in the Blue Spring before they left.
Yeah. So that's at Red Clay, right? And Red Clay has a new movie for those of you that haven't been there recently.
Yes, interpretive film in the theater. And Ann and I also when we went to Blythe's Ferry to wait for them, we got ahead of them that day. And Billy Ogle, who ferries them across in his boat so that it's similar to the way it was then. And he can't take that many. So, well, I think this year he made it in 2 trips. Sometimes it's taken 3 trips to get them across, which of course the ferries were moving back and forth all day to get detachments across. So, but we met him early, and he took us Hiwassee Island, which is where Doublehead was killed, and was at the mouth of the Hiwassee River, and Blythe's Ferry is right there at the mouth of the Hiwassee. So he took Ann and I all the way around the island there. So we were just about to land. The Corps does not allow anyone to go on the island now, but we were just about to land the boat for to get on the island, to walk on it. And then here came, there's the boat with the game warden.
Mhm.
So naturally we did not stop, but still it was great to circle the island and see how, even with the lake, see how large it is even today, when it would have been much larger before the lake was built.
And if y'all don't know this, they kick it off. They kick it off in Cherokee at Gadua Mound. And they've taken that old building down and their tents up now, and there were elks in that field when we were there. It's just really, it's a really special place. But all the families come. It's not, this is not open to the public, but all the families come and former bike riders come and to kick it off for the kids, and the kids introduce themselves, and it's really something. And they're so different after they've been on that trail a little while, but they are athletes. Don't kid yourself. Ooh.
Now, the former deputy chief of the Eastern Band, Larry Blythe, is 67, and he made the ride fine. And his daughter also rode.
Right.
With so.
Anyway, if you want to ask us anything else, ask us while it's still fresh in our heads, because we forget it from year to year. But if you find anything that ties the Eastern Band back in, we would really like to develop more of a script for that.
Oh, and I'll change subject with Anna.
Okay.
Talking with Chief Hoskin yesterday, he's going to select the date right away for your event in October, which I'll let you tell about in a moment. But his scheduler that I'd sent the note to, that I heard back from, and
Yeah.
to someone else, she's out, thinking at a special workshop for the summer or something.
So
Forwarded to someone else, and he said that, and Chuck said he would get with him and select the date so that you could move forward
right.
right away. So you're Anna.
Yeah. So, you know, we have done a beautiful plaque for the Cherokee girls who came to Salem. And that's
Well, you need to tell me about Salem College and all.
Oh, what you want me to tell them? Okay, there's a girls' school. It's the oldest girls' school in the U.S. that has been constantly teaching women. And there are 13 Cherokee girls who came to school between 1821 and after removal in the 1840s. And it just is a great way to understand the changes in Cherokee people. Some of these girls stayed in the East. All these girls came from really wealthy families. This is not a boarding school. So anyway, we will dedicate this beautiful plaque, and we will have venues open where people can see the girls' records, what they bought, what they did, what their classes were. We will take you, and you know, it's in a historic area, and there'll be a dinner and a church service, and I hope we're going to play the Trail of Tears movies the Park Service has just put out, and you'll get to see the doctor's house. And anyway, it'll be in October, evidently from what Jack said. They postponed it last year because of COVID. So it looks like we're on. We'll go to work.
Oh, some of the girls were.
Sally Ridge, Jane Ross, James Vance.
Which was Major Ridge's daughter.
Right, Major Ridge's daughter.
Daughter.
Uh-huh. John Rogers's daughter. And Help me, Jack. David, who else were they?
The McNair daughters.
The McNair daughters.
James Vance daughters. So they were, as you said, the very
Ruth Ross's daughter.
Lewis, right? The wealthy elite families.
And a daughter who David thinks he knows who's the parents of, but we're not quite sure, Sarah McDonald. Some of her are George Hicks's daughters, who was a detachment leader. So it's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful story about what happened with those families and how those girls interacted later and how they were leaders in the Cherokee Nation.
And as Anna said, it was an exclusive girls' school because we had all these wealthy families all over the South, including a couple of the governors who were fighting for Cherokee removal. Their daughters were also there in the school.
Right.
And I think some of them at the same time that
the Cherokee girls were. Yes, they were. So it's fun. I'm hoping all our friends from Tennessee up around Cleveland are going to come.
Hint, hint, Laura.
Yeah, hint, hint, Laura. We want good representation from there. You guys will love it. Well, Araminta Ross was there. She came from the agency there in a wagon.
It's amazing that when you're talking about those names, that's one of the reasons that I joined this group, because all the references to those people are the people that we have records of. You know, you were talking about the even selling the land, you know, the reservation properties, all those things. I've looked at those. So even though I'm not Cherokee, I feel very connected.
And
can I ask one other question? Oh,
yes.
Can I ask a question right quick? When you were talking about the Moravian reference to the Cherokees that were coming into the agency from North Carolina, is that the group that came through Fort Armistead?
Yes.
And down through Cleveland and down my main street in Calhoun?
Yeah, and if you want to write
They wouldn't have come through Cleveland.
No, I'm sorry, not Cleveland, Athens. I shouldn't have said that. I said they came down through Tellico and down through Athens, Riceville, Calhoun, and came down and across the ferry there.
Yeah, why don't you, if you put that together for us, that would be good.
Okay, see, that's the segment that's marked through Calhoun,
Right.
there through my little hometown. And that was what that was based on, and that's based on, you know, Brett's research. But,
Well, and Brett's got part of that. That's Brett references Herman Ruda's account, the one Jack said.
Which is also in volume 10 of the Moravian.
Yeah, it's in volume 10.
Volume 10. I was making some notes here because I don't have
Yeah,
that reference.
if you haven't read volume 10, it's all about the agency.
Okay.
And you have a copy because
I do have a copy. We have a copy there at the Heritage Center. Anyway, okay, well, I'll stop my interruption. I was just curious to be sure that that was the tie.
Those girls love
All the books you have there, Laura, are courtesy of Anna.
I know. And I was there when she presented them. That's why I was kind of teasing with her.
Yeah. And I'm trying to get Anna to come back to speak at Concord next month.
They really liked riding up that trail. I hate y'all didn't have more time for interpretation for them there.
Right, at the Heritage Center.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, see, I missed it this time. You know, I live in Middle Tennessee, and so I missed that, but I've talked to Darlene quite a bit about it. And, you know, one of the Lewis Ross descendants, you know, sat there and talked to Darlene, and it was really, you know, really sweet because it does make a connection with them. You know, the most heartwarming part of it, and I have met lots of them now, is when they go to Blythe Ferry and they find those names on those granite slabs, you know. And so I did follow them on Facebook this time, even though I wasn't there.
I have to say, I'm so glad to see Laura here. when Rita and I went to Tennessee, we went back to the Heritage Center several times. It's just, we felt drawn to it, and there is so much information, and they are so knowledgeable, and the marked trails there, it's and just the stories behind it, that it's very, very special to be there. And there isn't enough time. There really is never enough time.
Not
But
enough
I hope that,
probably.
I do hope the writers go back. You know, I'm sure once they've been there, you'd sort of feel drawn to go back and spend more time, because there's a lot of people in Tennessee, Laura included. I mean, just so much information, and they're so eager to share it, because that's why they do what they do. And it's really a fantastic opportunity to go back there.
Plus, I dragged you out to the tick-laden area that was probably the site of the Major John Walker House.
And we went back there. We went back there 2 more times. I said, before we leave, let's just go. And Rita let me get out of the car, and I'm walking around the tick-laden. Yes, but just to be where they were is a very powerful experience. It's very motivating. It's very powerful. And you know, I would never have known that without Laura and of course Brett's research, and you know, it takes a village to tell these stories. So you know, it was fun watching the bike riders this year, because I'd been to those places, and so when I was watching them, I was kind of going, yes, girls, I hear you, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic experience. So
Yeah.
Now, we had the one young lady that we visited, the George Harlan house, and she was descended from George Harlan. And also we had the Lewis Ross descendant. And we had a young lady, Casey Oldfield, that was descended from Harry Conrad. So we went into his house, and we left her there at the end because she wanted to be the last person out so she could say goodbye to her grandfather in his house.
I mean, it's just magical for those kids. They're not kids, most of them. No, we had one 19-year-old, and other than that, everybody was older. But it's really moving. It's amazing. But there's so much at the agency site. You know, I just wish we could interpret that. Wish we had a little longer there. Why do we rush out of there, Jack? Where do they go next? I've forgotten. When we leave the agency.
Well, the agency, well, that's when they have to ride the Blythe Ferry.
Oh, and that's a hellacious ride.
Yes.
Oh, from Blythe's Ferry up through Pikeville. Oh, my goodness.
Yes, I mean,
that's scary in a car.
It is a hellacious ride.
And then following that, I spent 2 or 3 days with Mike doing research in the Knoxville area. So
We had fun. Found lots of stuff.
yeah, and lots more to be copied.
Lots more to get.
So we
You know, when I started into this, I said, do they not already have this all figured out?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because I thought I was coming in on the tail end of it.
All figured out, yeah, right.
Well,
You know, those girls also need
Lena,
those
it's
shirts.
good to see you, and glad you made it with us.
Mhm.
Okay. So, do we have any further business before I adjourn us?
Jack, I thought when you mentioned the Menkiller Porter, you might also mention the recent release of Menkiller poems.
What?
I guess they went into Wilma's barn. Charlie gave 2 people access to Wilma's barn, and they came up with, can you see it?
Oh, yes. Oh, Menkiller poems.
Boy,
I misunderstood you. I thought you said Menkiller coins, and I thought, okay,
you
yes.
already talked about that.
Yeah, you might mention that, Patsy. I'll let
Well,
you.
it's a very slim volume, as you can see. But it's entitled Menkiller Poems, The Lost Poetry of Wilma Menkiller. And the forward is by Joy Harjo. And, you know, it takes maybe 20 minutes to read it unless you really go back and redo, you know, reread some of the poems. And it's just an interesting insight into some of what she was thinking during parts of her life.
And Joy Harjo was there and wrote a poem that she had written, and also read one of Wilma's to conclude.
Okay, well, I wonder if I'm sure it was out of this book.
It was, and they were selling them there, and I got a copy there.
Okay. I figured they timed the release
Yes.
to coincide with that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if we have no further business, I will declare us adjourned